behind, but thank you. So good afternoon. Welcome to this second environmental justice focused listening session of the State Water Board's efforts to update and implement the water quality control plan for the San Francisco Bay, Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta Estuary, or the Bay Delta Plan. I'm Joaquin Esquivel. I'm chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. I want to make all the participants aware today that this is a listening session that is being recorded and is being streamed via webcast on the California Environmental Protection Agency website, and that's at video.calepa.ca.gov. And the recording will also be posted on the State Water Board's Bay Delta Plan program page following the session. With me here today, I'm joined by board member Sean McGuire. And in addition, we have board member Laurel Firestone observing the meeting today. The recording will be shared with the other board members that aren't with us here today. So know that we will all continue to have the benefit of today's presentations and discussion. So the purpose of today's listening session is to receive input from environmental justice organizations, representatives of economically disadvantaged communities, and Black, Indigenous, and people of color organizations on the board's current efforts to update and implement the Bay Delta Plan, which include consideration of possible voluntary agreements. The State Board previously held an environmental justice focused listening session on March 27th, 2023. For those of you that were part of that, thank you and welcome back. At that meeting, we provided general background information on the State Water Board's Bay Delta processes. During today's listening session, general responses will be provided to questions and comments received at the March 7th Environmental Justice Focused Listening Session. We've also developed a frequently asked questions document in response to questions and comments received at the previous listening session, and we'll post that to our website. We want these conversations to be additive and not just repeat to you the same issues, and make sure that we are actually responding here according to what the feedback we're hearing from you. So we hope that you find that to be the case. So today's listening session, the State Water Board staff will give a short overview of the State Board's Bay Delta planning and implementation efforts. That will be followed by remarks from staff from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and California Natural Resources Agency and Department of Water Resources, and then the Natural Resources Agency, all three who helped negotiate the voluntary agreement proposal. We will then move opportunity to provide feedback and input on specific environmental justice issues that the board should consider when updating and implementing the Bay Delta Plan. And based on feedback from the first listening session, we have structured today's listening session to help ensure that all participants are able to provide input through smaller breakout discussions. Those will be followed by summaries from those small groups to this larger group from volunteers and board staff. The smaller group breakout discussions will not be recorded. There will be many of them. It will be hard to have those here all displaying at one time. So we will leave the breakout session and then rejoin here as a group, and we'll begin recording again at that point and have a readout from those breakout sessions. There will be summaries. We'll also have an opportunity for an open forum for any comments where members of the public can make additional comments no longer than 3 minutes on topics not on the agenda today. And if there is further reflection and need for folks on today's topic as well. In preparation for the smaller group breakout discussions, we ask that participants who have joined via the Zoom meeting platform check that your name is correctly displayed. We will also ask that you please add your organization name to your display name if applicable. If you need to update your display name, just hover over your name here on the platform, click on the ellipses, and then click on rename. For those of you attending via telephone, staff will call on you at a time based on your number, and we can help identify you here so that we appropriately list you. And at this time, I think Molly Williams will ask for telephone participants to identify themselves. I think we have at least one.
Hello, everyone. It looks like a 916 area code is here. If you could just unmute yourself and let us know your name, then we can rename you here so we can all see who you are.
Hey, this is board member Laurel Firestone. Thanks.
Oh, cool. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, board member. We'll name you accordingly. Really appreciate that. So we very much appreciate your attendance here, everyone, and your willingness to share your perspectives with us. We would also like to acknowledge that a group of environmental justice representatives requested to present a panel during today's meeting. Water Board staff did agree to the group presenting during the open forum, but unfortunately, there was miscommunication about that agreement. We want to reiterate our commitment to learning from environmental justice communities and leaders. This second listening session was designed in response to community feedback from the first listening session that I conducted and we held. We remain interested in learning from leaders from environmental justice communities, both through individual meetings as well through future board processes. We're committed to incorporating everyone's feedback, perspective, and concerns into our decision-making processes here. We want to thank you once again for the engagement and for helping to ensure that the Bay Delta Plan is updated in a way that advances equity and justice. Apologies, I was suddenly muted there. So I just want to, before we turn to the staff presentation, I just want to, and I will turn it in a moment to Board Member McGuire. I just want to personally as well, just thank you all. There is no project more important right now to the board than the update of the Bay Delta Plan and consideration of voluntary agreements and continuing to bring together what is, I know, a project that is long overdue. The board has committed publicly here again and again, and here for me, it is with urgency that we say that we're looking to complete and have a board vote around the Sacramento Delta component of the Bay Delta Plan by next summer, fall. And so there's a lot of work to do in the next year. Your participation and understanding where we are in this discussion, how to contribute, and how to help support the board's effort is appreciated. So just thank you. I feel the urgency. I know that we all have around not just this issue, but so many of the water issues that we are facing here within the state, and how protection of the Bay Delta and it's not just water quality, but quantities here can help ensure a more viable and stable future for our state. So just thank you. And I'll turn it over to Board Member McGuire for any comments that he has.
Yes, thank you, Chair Eskel. I appreciate that. And I just appreciate this second listening session for environmental justice communities being organized. I want to say how much I had wanted to attend and listen into the first one. And I was very thankful that the recording was completed, because I was then able to watch the recording later. So it was very important for me to be able to be here today with you. I absolutely concur with Chair Estel. There really is no other higher priority right now than the update to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. And paramount to that is hearing your voices here. So I'm very thankful that we're able to have this second listening session. And I also feel strongly that this is just one point and one opportunity of many that we'll have over the coming year, plus as the plan update process continues to unfold. It's an incredibly complex water quality control plan update. It's an incredibly complex watershed. None of these decisions, from my point of view, are to be taken lightly. And it's very important to me personally to hear your perspectives on the updates to this plan and what it should include or should not include. So again, thank you for your participation. I'm here. I will be here for the duration of this session, and look forward to the dialogue. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Board Member. It means a lot to have you here, part of the discussion, and just appreciate the time and commitment I know you continue to put into the work here, along with all the other board members as well. So just thank you. Now we can turn to our staff presentation. We have Claudia Buccelli, who will lead us off here.
Thank you, Chair Esquivel and Board Member McGuire. Welcome to our second environmental justice listening session on efforts to update and implement the Water Quality Control Plan for the San Francisco Bay, Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta estuary. My name is Claudia Buccelli, and I'm an environmental scientist with the State Water Board. This slide provides an overview of the State Water Board staff presentation. I will describe the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, including ongoing efforts to update and implement the plan. I will also discuss opportunities for public participation in these processes. I will end by providing information about the breakout group sessions. Next slide, please. State law requires that the State Water Board and the regional water boards adopt water quality control plans to reasonably protect beneficial uses of water. Beneficial uses include municipal, industrial, agricultural, and fish and wildlife uses. The State Water Board protects water quality that affects the beneficial uses of water in the Bay Delta, in part through its Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, also known as the Bay Delta Plan. The Bay Delta Plan identifies beneficial uses of water in the Bay Delta, largely flow-based water quality objectives to reasonably protect the beneficial uses, and a program of implementation to achieve these objectives and monitoring and reporting requirements. The Bay Delta Plan contains water quality objectives to protect the beneficial uses that are both narrative and numeric. Narrative objectives describe the general water quality and flow conditions that must be attained through watershed management. They also serve as the basis for the detailed numeric objectives. Numeric objectives are specific numbers, for example, cubic feet per second of flow, or percentages of unimpaired flow, or the amount of natural flow that must remain in the stream. The Bay Delta Plan also includes other flow-related requirements like salinity, dissolved oxygen, and water project operational requirements to protect fish and other aquatic species. The State Water Board is required under state and federal law to periodically review its water quality control plans and to update those plans as needed through a public process. The State Water Board is actively engaged in efforts to update and implement the Bay Delta Plan to provide reasonable protection of fish and wildlife in the Bay Delta watershed to address significant native fish and wildlife population declines in recent decades. Next slide, please. Now that we have covered an overview of the Bay Delta Plan, this next portion of the presentation will discuss the State Water Board's current efforts to update and implement the Bay Delta Plan. This slide provides a map of the Bay Delta watershed and the areas covered by the Bay Delta planning and implementation processes. The Bay Delta watershed includes the Sacramento and San Joaquin River systems, the Delta, the Suisun Marsh, and the San Francisco Bay. The Sacramento and San Joaquin River systems, including their tributaries, drain water from about 40% of California's land area, supporting a variety of beneficial uses of water. The Bay Delta is one of the most important ecosystems in California. As the largest tidal estuary on the western coast of the Americas, it supports a vast array of aquatic, terrestrial, and avian wildlife in the Delta, San Francisco Bay, and nearshore ocean, as well as a diverse assemblage of species upstream of the Delta. The watershed is also an integral component of California's water supply system for people and farms. The Bay Delta Plan is being updated and implemented through concurrent related processes. The State Water Board updated the Bay Delta Plan's lower San Joaquin River tributary flow. Yeah, keep that slide, please. Thank you. And Southern Delta salinity components in 2018. Efforts are currently underway to implement those updates and to consider a voluntary agreement on the Tuolumne River. In addition, the board is currently in the process of considering updates to other portions of the Bay Delta Plan, covering the Sacramento River, Delta Eastside tributaries, and the Delta, including consideration of proposed voluntary agreements. The board has not approved voluntary agreements and will consider the input received throughout the board's public processes to inform its decisions. Next slide, please. Native species in the Delta ecosystem are experiencing an ecological crisis. For decades, critical habitat has been converted to farmland and urban uses, and the quality of water in channels has been degraded. And there has been a substantial overall reduction in flows and significant changes in the timing and distribution of these flows, and species have been cut off from natal waters. In addition, other aquatic ecosystem stressors, such as climate change, are impacting native fish. These issues have led to severe declines, and in some cases extinctions, of native fish and other aquatic species. Expeditious action is needed on the watershed level to address the crisis, including actions by the State Water Board, state and federal fish and wildlife agencies, water agencies, and other users. The State Water Board is the primary agency responsible for addressing the flow and water quality issues and is doing so in part through its efforts to update and implement the Bay Delta Plan. Next slide, please. This slide presents an overview of the Bay Delta planning and implementation processes, which is similar to other water quality control planning processes. This process can be summarized in 5 steps. The first step is review. The State Water Board is required to regularly review the plan to determine if changes should be considered. The next step is revise. The board develops updates to the plan as appropriate through a public process, including consideration of alternatives. The public process informs the development of final proposed plan amendments for consideration and adoption by the board. The plan identifies actions the board will take through the board's authorities, generally through a subsequent process, and actions other entities should take to protect beneficial uses of water and meet the water quality objectives. The third step is implement. The board takes actions to implement the plan using its relevant authorities and coordinates with other agencies and parties on other actions. The fourth step is to adaptively manage. Adaptive management actions that are consistent with the plan are considered and implemented as appropriate, based on monitoring and special studies to improve the effectiveness of implementation actions. The fifth step is evaluate. The board continuously evaluates the overall effectiveness of the implemented plan and considers whether changes may be needed to the plan or its implementation, which initiates the review process again. Next slide, please. The State Board is currently working through different processes to update and implement the Bay Delta Plan that are in different stages of the planning and implementation process. These 3 processes are color-coded on this slide and throughout the rest of the presentation to highlight the different processes. The first is the implementation of the lower San Joaquin River flows and Southern Delta salinity objectives that were adopted in 2018. The board is currently working on implementing these updates through a regulation that would require water right holders to bypass flows to meet the required flows, as well as other measures consistent in the 2018 Bay Delta Plan. As a separate process, the board is also currently considering a proposal for a voluntary agreement on the Tuolumne River. If adopted, it would require an amendment to the lower San Joaquin River flow components of the Bay Delta Plan that were adopted in 2018. This is currently in the planning phase and under consideration, which may or may not result in changes in the Bay Delta Plan and approval of the Tuolumne River voluntary agreement. In addition, the board is currently in the planning stage of updating the Sacramento Delta and tributaries components of the Bay Delta Plan. And part of this process includes consideration of proposed voluntary agreements as an alternative to a regulatory approach. I will talk more about each of these processes and opportunities for public input over the next few slides. Next slide, please. First, I'm going to provide an overview of the 2018 updates to the Bay Delta Plan focused on the lower San Joaquin River flows. The blue oval in the slide identifies the general geographic scope of the Bay Delta Plan's lower San Joaquin River tributary flows and Southern Delta salinity components. This geographic area generally covers the lower San Joaquin River, its 3 main tributaries, including the Stanislaus, Tuolumne, and Merced rivers, as well as the Southern Delta. Next slide, please. This slide shows a map of the areas of the Bay Delta Plan that were updated in 2018. The updates included new and revised objectives and a program of implementation for lower San Joaquin River flows and Southern Delta salinity. The Southern Delta salinity requirements were revised to provide reasonable protection of agriculture in the Southern Delta. The lower San Joaquin River flow requirements were updated to provide reasonable protection of fish and wildlife from the lower San Joaquin River watershed through the Delta. The flow requirements included a new tributary flow objective that applies to the Stanislaus, Tuolumne, and Merced rivers at the confluence with the lower San Joaquin River. The tributary flow objective requires 40% of the Stanislaus, Tuolumne, and Merced river flows to be left in stream for fish and wildlife from February through June. Unimpaired flow represents the water production of a river basin, unaltered by upstream diversions, storage, or by the export or import to or from other watersheds. It is essentially an estimate of available water supplies that can be used for different purposes, including providing in-stream flows and supporting water diversions for agriculture, municipal, and other uses. The flow requirements include provisions for adaptive management of the flows to avoid impacts and improve protections. Specifically, the required percent of unimpaired flow can move up or down within a range from 30 to 50% of unimpaired flows. Flows can be shaped, shifted, and managed as a budget to improve ecosystem benefits. For example, flows from the winter may be shifted to the fall to improve temperatures. In addition to the tributary flows, there is also a revised minimum in-stream flow objective on the lower San Joaquin River at Vernalis, as seen on the map as the half yellow and half green point. The revised objective requires flows at Vernalis, as provided by the percent of unimpaired flow objective, to be at least 1,000 cubic feet per second, with an adaptive range of 800 to 1,200 cubic feet per second. Next slide, please. The Bay Delta Plan requires completion of various actions to inform implementation, referred to as early implementation actions. These actions include forming a watershed group referred to as the Stanislaus, Tuolumne, and Merced Working Group. This group is comprised of agencies and others with relevant expertise in fisheries and water management to help inform implementation actions. Another early implementation action that was called for in the 2018 update to the Bay Delta Plan is the development of biological goals. Biological goals are quantitative metrics that the State Water Board will use to assess its actions, the actions that it is taking under the Bay Delta Plan. The Bay Delta Plan identifies that the biological goals will be used for the purposes of informing the adaptive implementation of flows, evaluating the effectiveness of flows, informing needed monitoring and reporting requirements, and informing future changes to the Bay Delta Plan. These biological goals and methods for implementing lower San Joaquin flows of the 2018 Bay Delta Plan update have not been adopted yet. A draft has been released and written comments were requested. The board plans to consider adoption of the biological goals in summer of 2023, where additional opportunities for input will be provided. In addition, the board has committed to continue reviewing and updating the biological goals on a regular basis. Next slide, please. While the State Water Board has completed the updates to the lower San Joaquin River flow components of the Bay Delta Plan, additional actions are needed to implement the changes through requirements on specific water right holders. The State Water Board is pursuing implementation of the lower San Joaquin River flows through a regulation to assign responsibility to water right holders for bypasses of flow and other associated actions to meet flow objectives. A notice of preparation for development of an environmental impact report in support of this regulation was released last summer. A draft regulation and draft environmental impact report are planned for early release in 2024. Next slide. So there are two upcoming opportunities for public input related to lower San Joaquin River flows. This summer or fall, there will be a board meeting to consider final biological goals for the lower San Joaquin River flows. In early 2024, there will be a draft regulation and environmental impact report in support of a regulation to implement the lower San Joaquin River flows. Next slide, please. In addition, the State Water Board received a proposed voluntary agreement for the Tuolumne River that staff are currently working to evaluate. Part of this review process will include providing opportunities for public review and input. The board has not made any decision about the Tuolumne River Voluntary Agreement proposal, and will conduct a full public process to inform whether to approve it. If approved by the board, the proposed Tuolumne River Voluntary Agreement would require revisions to the Bay Delta Plan because the proposal does not meet the 2018 lower San Joaquin River flow objective of 30 to 50% of unimpaired flow. To initiate the public process to consider the Tuolumne Voluntary Agreement, The board issued a notice of a possible Bay Delta Plan amendment and scoping meeting to receive input on possible updates to the Bay Delta Plan and associated environmental analyses. The board also held a scoping meeting on May 18th and requested public comments by May 25th. A draft report identifying the scientific basis for the Tuolumne River Voluntary Agreement proposal will be released for review and comment later this year, followed by a draft staff report that will also be available for public review and comment. The board will also hold public meetings on these matters and will continue to consider all input received in developing possible updates to the Bay Delta Plan to include Tuolumne River voluntary agreements. This includes the possibility for no changes to the plan. Next slide, please. Now I'll provide an overview of the efforts that are underway to update the Sacramento Delta portion of the Bay Delta Plan. The blue oval in this slide identifies the general geographic scope, including the Sacramento River and its tributaries, the Delta Eastside tributaries, including the Sumnes, McCollum, and Calaveras rivers, as well as the Delta. This area is referred to as the Sacramento Delta watershed, or SAC Delta for short. Next slide, please. The State Water Board is considering two possible pathways for updating this part of the plan: a regulatory pathway and a voluntary agreement proposed by other state agencies and water users. First, I'll discuss the regulatory pathway. The State Water Board is considering the Bay Delta Plan amendments for the Sacramento Delta that are consistent with with staff proposed updates described in a 2018 framework for possible SAC Delta updates to the Bay Delta Plan. This includes possible flow objectives for the Sacramento River, tributaries, and Delta Eastside tributaries that call for 55% of unimpaired flow, with an adaptive management range from 45 to 65% of unimpaired flow. In addition to possible inflows, the framework identifies possible cold water habitat provisions, inflow-based Delta outflows that would require Delta inflows to be provided as outflows, interior Delta flows, monitoring, reporting, and evaluation provisions, as well as other provisions. Next slide, please. The State Water Board is also considering Bay Delta Plan amendments for the Sacramento Delta that could incorporate the proposed voluntary agreements. Broadly, the proposed voluntary agreements include flow and habitat restoration actions on certain tributaries to the Delta and in the Delta. This slide provides an overview of where the flow and habitat restoration actions would originate. These flow and habitat restoration actions are intended to meet a proposed new narrative ecosystem protection objective to protect the viability of native fish populations and contribute to the existing salmon protection objective that calls for the doubling of salmon populations. The proposed voluntary agreements include governance, science, monitoring, reporting, and review provisions to inform the implementation and future decisions regarding the continuation of the voluntary agreements. An initial 8-year term is proposed. Following the 8-year term, the voluntary agreements could be extended if they are shown to be effective. The voluntary agreements could also be modified if modifications would provide for a more effective implementation. If voluntary agreements are not effective, a regulatory pathway, such as the proposed unimpaired flow objectives based on the 2018 framework, would apply. The State Water Board has made no decision regarding whether to approve the proposed voluntary agreements and will consider input from the public as part of the Bay Delta Plan update process to determine how to proceed. Next slide, please. There are several upcoming opportunities for public participation related to the SAC Delta updates to the Bay Delta Plan. This summer, the draft SAC Delta staff report will be released for public review and comment, as well as public hearings to receive oral comments. Next slide, please. I will now provide responses to additional questions we heard during the last listening session. Representatives of Black, Indigenous people of color, and economically disadvantaged communities have sought greater inclusion of their concerns in the Bay Delta Plan update and implementation processes. In response to this feedback, the State Water Board organized a public listening session in March of 2023, focused around considering environmental justice issues in the Bay Delta Plan. The board received questions and comments about the Bay Delta Plan processes and how changes in flow and water quality are impacting subsistence fishing and harmful algal blooms in the Delta, among other important issues. In response to those comments, the State Water Board staff have organized this second public listening session to receive further input on environmental justice issues that could inform our planning efforts. Board staff have also created an FAQs document in part to respond to comments and answer questions received during previous listening sessions that will be posted on the State Water Board website. Over the next few slides, I will answer and address some of the questions and comments that we've received during the first public listening session. Next slide, please. We received questions and comments about how the board is considering environmental justice and updates to the Bay Delta Plan. The State Water Board is actively working to address concerns with the declines of native fish species that have impacted subsistence fishing opportunities in the Delta through the proposed SAC Delta updates to the Bay Delta Plan and lower San Joaquin River flow implementation efforts, including the consideration of voluntary agreements. These processes are intended to improve environmental conditions for native fish and other wildlife species. In addition, the State Water Board is investing in new monitoring strategies to identify management and mitigation actions that the board could take to reduce impacts of harmful algal blooms in the Delta. The board encourages participants of this listening session to provide input during the breakout sessions on further efforts the board could make to address these and other issues with its updates and implementation actions for the Bay Delta Plan. Next slide, please. Delta communities and others have expressed significant ongoing concerns with the ways that harmful algal blooms are impacting the Delta. In response, the board is investigating how it can reduce the negative effects of HABs through its Bay Delta Plan update and implementation processes. Because the causes of HABs in the Delta are not fully understood, the board is investing in monitoring strategies to improve our understanding of the environmental conditions such as flow, nutrients, and water temperature that contribute to HABs formation. The State Water Board staff are working with others from the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Board and other state and federal agencies to coordinate HABs monitoring and communicate the latest science on HABs and mitigation measures. In addition to investing in new monitoring, the State Water Board staff are evaluating how the update on and implementation of the Bay Delta Plan could contribute to the incidence of HABs in the Delta. The draft SAC Delta staff report analyzes the effects of possible alternatives for the SAC Delta update on HABs formation in the Delta. The report also discusses current and proposed HABs monitoring. The public will be able to comment on the draft staff report in writing and during public hearings when the staff report is released in the summer of 2023. Next slide, please. The State Water Board has been engaging with California Native American tribes through tribal listening sessions and formal government-to-government consultation to incorporate the tribal perspectives and interests in the Bay Delta Plan update and implementation processes. In the summer of 2022, the State Water Board sent an invitation for tribal consultation for the regulation to implement the 2018 update to the lower San Joaquin River flows and Southern Delta salinity components of the Bay Delta Plan. Early in 2023, the State Water Board sent a request for tribal consultation on the Sacramento Delta update to the Bay Delta Plan to tribes located in the Bay Delta watershed, as well as tribes located in the Trinity River watershed. Government consultations can be arranged at the request of tribal leadership. State Water Board staff held tribal listening sessions in March and May of 2023 to gather input from tribal leadership on the board's efforts to update the Bay Delta Plan. As a result of the feedback provided at those listening sessions and at public board workshops, the State Water Board is considering incorporating tribal beneficial uses, also known as TBUs, into the Bay Delta Plan. This morning, the State Water Board held an informational item on the consideration of adding TBUs to the Bay Delta Plan. The informational item included an opportunity for tribal representatives to directly address the board on this issue. In addition to considering tribal beneficial uses, State Water Board staff are working to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge into the Bay Delta Plan update and implementation efforts. Traditional ecological knowledge could help inform technical policy considerations on the Bay Delta planning and implementation efforts, including the improvement of adaptive management decisions and monitoring. Traditional ecological knowledge can also inform the evaluation for plan effectiveness at protecting fish and wildlife beneficial uses, possible tribal beneficial uses, and future updates and implementation. In addition to receiving the tribal feedback on appropriate sources for literature review, staff are also exploring potential mechanisms for further documenting traditional ecological knowledge through contract resources that would inform this process. Next slide, please. This slide identifies additional resources available to interested parties who may wish to learn more about the Bay Delta Plan update and implementation processes and to connect with our team. Our Bay Delta Watershed Efforts webpage is listed on this slide, and it contains additional information regarding Bay Delta Plan update and implementation efforts. This slide also presents information about subscribing to our Bay Delta Notices email list, which is used to provide updates to interested parties related to the State Water Board's efforts to update and implement the Bay Delta Plan. Finally, you may contact the State Water Board staff at bay-delta@waterboards.ca.gov. Next slide, please. Now that we've provided an overview of the Bay Delta planning processes, I will provide information for participating in the breakout sessions.
Actually, Claudia, not to interrupt, but I think we're going to move away from breakout sessions. I think we have enough folks that we can just keep everything into one general discussion here amongst us. We were going to do breakout sessions because we were expecting a few more folks, but we think we're right in a number that we can go ahead and just handle ourselves. So we'll skip the breakout discussion component of it.
Okay, great. Well, participation remains very similar. So during the breakout, or well, sorry, not during the breakout room, but if you want to talk, please raise your hand. Use the raise hand feature on Zoom if you wish to speak. Turn on your video if possible during the breakout sessions to make them more interactive. And please be ready to speak when it is your turn so that we can provide all participants with the opportunity to be heard, and mute yourself when you're not speaking. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are some questions that we'd like you to think about in preparation for our discussion. What environmental justice issues should the board consider when updating the Bay Delta Plan? And are these issues specific to implementation of the lower San Joaquin River flows, consideration of Tuolumne River voluntary agreements, or the consideration of the Sac Delta updates, including Sac Delta voluntary agreements? Thank you for listening to this presentation and attending, and I will turn it back over to Chair Escobar.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Really appreciate it. And now we will go and turn things over to the department leaders from the Department of Water Resources and California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Thank you both for joining. I butchered my script a bit earlier. I said the Natural Resources Agency would be here. These two agencies are obviously housed at Natural Resources is what I was more meaning to say. So good to see you, Brooke. Good to see you, Eric. Thank you both for joining us. Hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. They don't even know what time or day it is, apparently. But thanks again for opportunity here to speak. Just teeing off of the staff presentation earlier and the opening remarks from you, Chair Escobar. Just wanted to, emphasize that the Department of Water Resources is here with State Board staff, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife to really support and encourage a timely update to the water quality control plan for the Bay Delta. We strongly believe that a timely implementation of this plan is necessary. That said, we understand also that there's many regulations that guide management of the waters and lands within this watershed, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, just to name a few. And we understand that this Bay Delta Plan, Water Quality Control Plan, is that mandate that must balance multiple beneficial uses across a wide variety of uses of that water resource. More specifically, our Department of Water Resources and Department of Fish and Wildlife, my colleague here, Brooke, We're very interested in a approach under a voluntary agreement structure for their potential to provide a collaborative and adaptive structure to guide the deployment of flow across a wide variety of different tributaries and the implementation of multiple habitat restoration projects at landscape scale, at significant scale. This approach in our mind, or my mind, I should say, is noteworthy in that it differs from how I've seen, felt, or the watershed is being traditionally managed, more in silos across or between the tributaries, including the Delta. You know, ultimately here, we're convinced that collaboration is a key to reversing a pattern of deterioration of our ecosystem here, the Bay Delta. Implementation of watershed scale program, like I mentioned earlier, for flows and restoration obviously requires extensive collaboration. For instance, you know, there's flexibility of deployment of flows contained in our VA proposal, and how those environmental flows, are deployed and within what range. These are the types of discussions that we would envision having on the table during our governance processes associated with the voluntary agreements. That said, you know, a lot of the work on the core elements of governance and science and the deployment of flows, we're really structuring those. We're in the process of putting more structure around what those look like. And we anticipate the release of draft documents to the public within the next several months. And then we would look for engagement with the public through the water board's public review process. So before I send things over there to my colleague, I just want to thank you all again for the opportunity here this afternoon. We really appreciate everyone's time, engagement, and feedback to date. I've been present at all of these past listening sessions, tribal ones, as well as the past environmental justice focused one, are in working through the draft supplement scientific basis report workshop that happened at the beginning of this year. And just want to reemphasize something said earlier, is our teams are actively working on comments received through all those processes. And here in the next, hopefully in the next several months or even shorter, we'd be looking to provide responses to a lot of those comments that were received. So Brooke, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. I think you talked a lot about the work that both of our departments are doing together in this space. So just to add a little bit to that, DFW is here along with the board and DWR to support this process to update the water quality control plan for the Delta. And we've really looked to this process and the VAs, the voluntary agreements that Eric mentioned, as a way to collaborate to guide flow and habitat restoration in the Bay Delta and tributaries. So, and we are very much interested in bringing different perspectives, areas of expertise, and backgrounds to work through a balanced approach to those beneficial uses. So it's like a key element for us moving forward with the water quality control plan update, our role in that and the voluntary agreements. But I also want to note, the Bay Delta is in a very difficult place. Fish and wildlife species have experienced severe declines, and other users of the system, local underrepresented communities, NGOs must be included when we're considering beneficial uses. And the best way to do that is by working together, not just with agencies, and getting that feedback and figuring out how to work it into the process now. So we really want to emphasize the importance of this particular point in the process. We're just over a year out from signing the voluntary agreement term sheet, and we are very much interested in feedback and listening sessions, and specifically the science and governance processes that are going to guide implementation of the flow and habitat elements. So I want to thank you for participating today. As Eric mentioned, CDFW is working with DWR to look at prior comments that we've gotten both on the documents and in listening sessions and preparing responses. We hope to have those out fairly soon. So thank you.
Thank you both. Really appreciate the participation, not just in this discussion, but consistently across this. And to your points, this is a complete collaboration across the state agencies, and appreciate your participation in this discussion. And importantly, just the listening, it means a lot. Thank you. With that, we will now, instead of going into breakout sessions, we will take folks' comment and we'll do our best to capture the discussion here, any questions and comments that you all are providing us. And as appropriate and we're able, if we can answer here in the moment, I want folks to do so that we're continuing to make sure that we are being here iterative and building off of the discussions that we have had here prior even to this meeting. And so just now, I think I don't think I have here rather on the screen are your guidelines for how to speak. One, please do just raise your hand. I will call folks in the order of your hands raised. Please keep your comments concise and relevant to environmental justice concerns and issues here as related to the Bay Delta Plan. Please listen actively and respect the perspectives and ideas and shared here by everyone and others. We pride ourselves in creating a decision-making space and discussion here at the board that's respectful. And so invite you all to make sure we continue to do that. I know conversations can be very personal oftentimes. These are very critical issues. And so just appreciate everyone's here then participation. So please do, again, raise your hand, use the raise hand feature if you wish to speak. Do turn on your video if you're able to. And here are your guiding questions. And so I'd like to first call our first person here. I see a couple of hands up. Please do raise your hands if you're looking to speak, and I can begin calling on folks otherwise as well. We'll also, as you see here, be kind of keeping track and taking folks' names down so that you can see who's coming up next. So our first speaker will be Molly Colton.
Hi, folks. This is Molly Colton with Sierra Club, California. I had questions and comments that aren't directly related to this. I mean, it's kind of related. Is that okay if I can still ask them right now?
Yeah, go ahead by all means, Molly. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So one of my questions is, how's the State Water Board responding to lawsuits against implementation of the Bay Delta Plan update? Because every delay and each delay of this update is an environmental justice issue and just further exacerbates the crisis that the Delta is experiencing. And two, I just wanted some additional clarification on the miscommunication that occurred between the State Water Board and local Delta groups. Restore the Delta, which is probably the leading environmental community group in the Delta, isn't participating today. And I just don't think it's good that the State Water Board didn't ensure that local community members would speak and be heard today. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. On the first, I don't think we're going to make too much comment about sort of legal strategy, but I appreciate the comment and it will be taken in. And when it comes to the Restore the Delta, unfortunately, I wish that someone had kind of picked up the phone, because I think the two main concerns that we received from the letter from Restore the Delta was around this video being recorded, which it is, as we can see here. And then additionally, there was a request for a panel for them to self-assemble on a panel at the here within the discussion, and we had said yes. I don't know why there was some miscommunication, but we had said yes as outside of then the breakout sessions we were going to be having. So yeah, I can't speak for Restore the Delta here than otherwise, but know that they and you all here are valued partners within this. So we'll continue to make sure that we rise to the standard that I know we all hold ourselves when it comes to engagement. I like to think that we've done that. Again, this second session is part of that. If there was miscommunication, really apologize for that, and look forward to touching base with Barbara Berrigan-Perea and others around the misinformation. So thank you. Next, I'd like to call Mary Kate Lowry.
Hi, Queen. My name is Mary Kate Lowry. Sherry Nasudawa, Great Lakes, Anishinaabe, Umachog. I wanted to share a few things. I spoke earlier at the tribal beneficial uses, and yes, and everybody's in support of that, and I would assume to see that on the outcome. The fact that it had to have a conversation just reflects our system of infrastructure that's based in a history of genocide, racism, and that we're trying to make things right. we are on the brink of destruction in terms of the survival of salmon, as many of these board members and people in our group attending today know. Salmon is entirely central to so many different tribal religions, and the attempted genocide of human people by the California state government not that long ago is being continued through the fish right now. And I'll just reiterate the importance that the State Water Board, as was said earlier, needs to be a steward of the fish. It needs, if the racial equity plan is, if we're serious about doing that, then we're serious about not killing tribal spirituality and culture. How about that? Can we not do that? It's crazy to me that over and over, and I as an educator working with tribal youth since 2006, I brought Native high school students to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission meeting. Okay, it's not hard to make the connection between flows, water quality, and fish kills. Like 60,000 dead adult salmon washed up on the shores of the Klamath River. My question is, where is the water coming from? It's coming from diversions. The water's not there. The water's getting sick. The water's being diverted. The water's getting sick. It's common sense. You don't need to put TEK up on a pedestal and call this like adaptive management of water. It's common sense. It's common sense. Your water needs to be in the rivers for them to be healthy. So again, over and over in the meetings, no voluntary agreements. Listening to, there's no voluntary choice to protect the salmon, to protect the water. So I want to thank everybody for being here. This is a moment in time where we're making things right, where we can make one decision by listening and not just checking the box. Creating an advisory board of tribal representatives that was mentioned earlier. I want to thank everybody for being here in the space.
Thank you, Ms. Lowry. I appreciate your comments, and thank you for your earlier participation in the board's informational item on tribal beneficial uses. There was strong support from I heard a number of board members to incorporate those. So we're looking forward to continuing to articulate what that looks like. And here, as we heard from folks, I think sometime in the summer is when staff report will be out, and we'll have something further to be discussing and understanding. So thank you. I appreciated your participation there. Please do raise your hands if you wish to provide comment here during this listening session. And I think there I saw for a moment, Teddy Moorhead, your hand up. And Teddy, if you're not prepared to speak, we can go to Gail Srandanovic. Oh, unless. Oh,
Yeah.
Teddy? Yes.
I have more questions alongside about long-term ramifications, with the levees and sea rising levels and just like natural disasters, like as far as California would see occur on a regular, like that we have like earthquakes and different things like that. What are the, do you have is there like a long-term plan for upgrading things in the levees, like parts or pieces? I mean, what happens if we have a major earthquake in that area and stuff cracks? And do you have long-term plans, planned out already for things?
Thank you, Ms. Moorhead. I appreciate your question and engagement here. The Delta Stewardship Council, through their Delta plan, has a very comprehensive approach to those issues that you're talking about when it comes to levee investment, earthquake risk in the Delta, other stressors. This project is focused on the flows that move down and through the Delta, and this project is looking to then set standards and consider voluntary agreements on that. So it's one component here that we're talking about, water quality and quantity. as it moves through the system. And those other components, like you said, the vulnerabilities to earthquake, I think of sea level rise, as you said, other risks, those are all being discussed and are part of work and plans that are at the Delta Stewardship Council. And so we can make sure here we follow up after this meeting. So to make sure to provide information to that agency as well, so you can see where the planning, particularly in the Delta plan, and other components like the levy investment strategy that I know that's been worked on, all kind of come together. So hopefully that's helpful and explains a bit more about the work. Next, then we can go to Gail Sridanovic.
Yes, my name is Gail Sridanovic. I'm co-chair of the Social Justice Task Force of San Mateo County Democracy for America. Our entire Democratic Club has gone on record in support of Restore the Delta and in support of the human rights claims of the tribal lawsuit and the tribe's needs for water and for salmon. I would mention that we're keenly aware that there's already been a lot of science. The California Water Impact Network, in my readings, has supplied a lot of science. I don't see a terrific need for more delays and more studies. If you would, use the available science, you would be far ahead. We're very concerned about the toxic levels in the Delta and its impact, especially on lower income communities. And we're very concerned that the tribes in the handing out of water rights in the beginning were completely excluded and had no voice. And they're now asking for help and their rights to water and to their precious salmon stocks, which are crashing. We are aware that the voluntary agreements are clearly not working. The State Water Board plan, or I think that's what it's called, doesn't go far enough, but it's a good step in the right direction, far better than the voluntary agreements. And we are very concerned that what should be a public good has been largely converted to a private good, destined to make money for the state, for those Central Valley water boards. And we recommend to you that you read the document called Water Heist, which documents within relatively recent times secret meetings in which water resources were handed out in what certainly looks and smells like corruption. So we're very concerned about all of that. And we ask you to at least follow the water plan, the Delta Water Plan, as being at least a step in the right direction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for yours. Greatly appreciate the participation, Ms. Sridanovic. Thank you. Please do raise your hands if you wish to speak. Teddy Moorhead, Ms. Moorhead, I think I saw your hand go back up if you'd like to speak further. We don't have any other hands currently up.
I'm sorry, that's not Teddy, it's me, Kathy Buchanan.
Oh, okay.
For some
Apologies.
reason, her name keeps appearing on it. I don't know why. But I just have some questions. I'm with the Tribal Water Collaborative, Marine Collaborative, and my questions actually go towards the users, because there really is no conservation planning in place for agriculture. My understanding is that they're still allowed to flood irrigate, which doesn't make any sense in our severe drought state that we've been having. And a lot of the water that is being diverted from the Delta is to irrigate the farms. And then there is no assurance that it's the small farms that are going to get that water. It's usually basically the large agricultural corporate farmers that are going to get the majority of it. So that's a huge waste of water. There are still tribes that do not have access to clean water, which basically has been declared water is a human right. So by not ensuring that the tribal communities and smaller communities have water, inadvertently, there is a declaration that those communities are non-human because they're not being guaranteed their right to water. So basically, I mean, what kind of assurances are going to be given that the smaller communities will not be left out of the water allocations? So far, I haven't seen a solid assurance of that.
Thank you, Ms. Buchanan. I appreciate your comments. I think that important to note that, well, one, we're ensuring that voices and communities are part of the Bay Delta Plan process here. So the setting of standards, understanding here the project and ensuring that beneficial uses are captured and understood and then here protected is important. I think then your question about the follow-on on how to ensure communities are having access to water. I think that there's two parts. There's certainly access to, say, drinking water and programs at the board that we're focused on, including with tribes, and ensuring that there is access to clean drinking water. But I think part of your question here then and point is around water rights and how they're administered and who then has right to water within there. And important to note that the standard setting won't in of itself change water rights. And so what will happen then is a need to implement. And I don't know if Diane or others would want to quickly comment on what implementation kind of looks like, but that's where your questions about, protection and allocation kind of come in after sort of a standard setting moment. So hopefully that kind of helps clarify the project and your question a bit, and look to Ms. Riddle in case I got, which is always the case, anything wrong there, or to clarify further to help kind of parse out what I know was, yeah.
No, I think you did a very good job. I guess I would explain that as we go through the planning process and as well as the implementation process, we evaluate the effects on different uses, and that would include municipal uses. And as we consider that planning process is needed, there are provisions that we can make to ensure that we are not impacting municipal communities and leaving them without a water supply. There are definitely, those are tools in the toolbox for the planning process and the implementation process. And those are all considerations that inform the board's efforts. So certainly that's an important consideration for the board within the board's responsibilities to ensure safe, reliable drinking water for the people of the state of California. That's amongst the board's top priorities and definitely significant in our planning decisions. So that is involved in the process. If there are specific comments that parties have on how we should be doing that, particular issues of concern, we're happy to consider those in this process. That's one of the purposes for these listening sessions, if there are particular concerns. And further, as we release our different planning documents and environmental evaluations, those are definitely something that we want input on, that we put those out for public comment in order to ensure that we're adequately evaluating the potential effects, developing appropriate mitigation measures, and ensuring that our planning and implementation efforts that we bring to the board for consideration are appropriately addressing those issues. So happy to receive feedback on any particular issues that folks have. That's definitely something we want to hear about.
Thank you very much, Ms. Riddle, and thank you, Ms. Buchanan. I appreciate the question and engagement around this. Other hands for commenters wishing to comment who have not been able to today yet. And also, if you can't find the raise hand button, feel free to come off unmute as well. It need to be so structured. We'll give folks a moment more. And then otherwise, we may be at the end of those, even though I know there's a number of other folks on the platform. Mary Kate Lowry.
I wanted to, let me bring down my hand. I wanted to bring up that TEK that is been mentioned. And again, that's like senior science. Like people say, I think we need to look at the fact that the tribes have senior water rights. It also has senior science, literally a science that has to do with place that has been in place for, thousands and thousands of years. And you guys have probably become accustomed to since time immemorial, like a long time about the place. And when I hear listening sessions and people are getting direction and requests, and it's been in general pretty unified about what tribes are requesting for appropriate flows. And I think we all know, what's going on here. And we feel like we don't have a lot of power because we have these big money corporations that are running this. They're making a lot of money on this water that's getting diverted out of our rivers, and we may feel like we're just a small part. We don't have any power, but and I'm just going to say this how I believe it, we have the spirit on our side because there's a reason why we can't live without water, right? There's a reason why people keep coming to these meetings.
I apologize, Ms. Lowry, you're breaking up a little. You may want to turn off your video just so that we focus on audio.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to make sure that we, like the big ideas, the bullet points would be senior water rights for tribes. It's the same thing as like senior science. And so if people can spend all the money they want on new science, new monitoring, but the senior scientists that know how to take care of these tributaries, the rivers and the fish, also known as tribal representatives, people that are gatherers. You don't need to learn TEK for adaptive management. You need to, I'm saying you as in decision makers, not necessarily you and anybody specifically, but listen to what's being said and do it. Right? It's being said. And what I feel there's this big elephant in the room where we know that the big money is pulling that water. That big money is running this show. I mean, it's just the way the world works. And I would like to empower everybody to dream bigger, step back, and understand that this whole water management paradigm has got to shift in California because our climate is changing. Everybody knows that we're going to have these big droughts. We're going to have those big storms. But in order not to have a literal extermination of salmon in our rivers, which is literally we're on the brink of. There was another fish kill, a juvenile fish kill, just not 2 years ago. And this is huge. And so to understand that we have to watch where the water's going and fight that and take a stand for that. And we're little people, but we have power and we can be victorious. We can make a difference. And I want to empower everybody to be here and to understand that we have to do something. And I thank everybody for being here and just to take a minute to not just to understand what TEK is. Well, to implement it means listening to what the people that know, senior scientists, are saying. That's all. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Lowry. I appreciate those comments. Thank you. Next, Kathy Buchanan. Now we can go back to you.
Thank you. Bringing up the big money implement or part of where the water goes to is very important because a lot of the big agricultural corporate farmers, they don't employ a lot of people. A lot of them are also genetically modified foods, and a lot of them also grow their food specifically to export out of the country. So, and when people talk about this is necessary for our economic growth. Well, for whose economic growth is it to divert the majority of our water to these agricultural fields? It's not for the locals who are actually here in the state of California. So how is the water board going to address giving the mass of the water away to those agricultural fields that don't benefit the people who live here in the state of California? I mean, is that going to be taken into consideration when the water, I mean, we're very dry right now, and it's only going to get drier because the aquifers haven't filled up yet. I mean, we've had a record snow, but that's all surface water runoff. It hasn't infiltrated to the aquifers that have been depleted, for tens of hundreds of feet below the Earth's surface. And a case in point is the San Bernardino forest that just burned down, and the other 4 forests that we just had massive, huge fires, and their towns burned down. That's because, the pine trees, they have the majority of our forests here in California are pine forests. Their root systems are very deep, meaning that they get their water from the aquifers. If they can't reach the aquifer, they dry out and they burn up, which is what has happened. So if we're going to get drier, so how is the water going to be allocated so that the people who actually live here in the state will benefit versus just the few corporate owners of those ag businesses that export everything out of the United States?
I appreciate your participation, Ms. Buchanan. Just a couple of things. I think it's the word that continues to always be critical to the board and certainly to myself is balance. And we need to recognize that we're not trying to create either ors amongst and we know that there are tensions. It's not to be naive amongst water uses and users. But here it's not to create again an either or, and a need to really see it as trying to balance, ensuring that, and there are communities that are dependent on agriculture within the state. It is a benefit. Not all is exported for non-domestic use. We're not going to completely unpack California ag around each of those crops, but I will mention that most of our crops here aren't genetically modified within the state. Genetically modified crops are usually corn, soy, other commodity crops. We're mainly specialty crops in the state, fruits, vegetables that have not been genetically modified. So I just want to make sure that I just kind of emphasize again the balance of what this project is really trying to better create. And we know that there is an imbalance. We know that our fish communities and here there's a lot of historical injustices amongst the work that we're all inheriting as well are at a place where, and it is why the board is taking this project to create a better balance, to ensure that all beneficial uses are better protected and that we can have a resilient California agricultural economy as much as our fish economy, and importantly, our people economy, because this is ultimately about our communities and the livability, the swimmability, the fishability of them here going into the future. So I appreciate your comments. Just did want to temper a little balance around the way to see what is going to need to be a lot of here, not seeing as much the black and white between the two issues, but really how we can ensure that both of them are able to thrive in what are, we know, difficult circumstances and in a climate where we're going to have to do with less. So your questions and points are important, and wanted to provide a little balance to that as well. So thank you.
I appreciate your response. My fear comes from the 1980s when I know we had a drought and the waters were cut off to the small farmers and completely diverted to the large farming businesses. And I'm just afraid that that might happen again. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I would note, proud of what we've been able to do these last couple of years for the first time in the state's history, where we curtailed rights because things were so dry, and needing to understand how we do that in a way that doesn't harm communities. So your points are well taken. So I really appreciate that, Ms. Buchanan. Other commenters, please do either raise your hands or come off on mute. And we may not be hearing additional comment at this point. Know that this isn't the only opportunity. We've been setting up and structuring these listening sessions to provide more opportunity, especially here in evening hours when folks may not be able to necessarily attend a board meeting. And so this isn't the only time to engage on this discussion for certain, but just want to make sure there's no one left here on the platform at this time that's wanting to contribute to the discussion and or have any points to make. Okay, and hearing none, we can begin to transition and wrap up a bit. I, again, am really appreciative of everyone's time here. I want to turn it over to Board Member McGuire or Board Member Firestone. I know you've been listening in and perhaps can come off on mute or not, but if you can, by all means, would welcome you to add anything further to the contribution, but or to the discussion rather, and look over to Board Member McGuire if you'd like to add any additional words or reflections.
I just really want to thank the folks who were able to participate today, and it matters. And I know there's a lot of different opinions and perspectives and challenges out there. And Chair Esquivel, your comments to balance, and really that's what this Bay Delta plan update seeks to accomplish is speaks to me as well. That's what I'm seeking out here through this update. That's why we're here to make sure that we're listening to communities that may be impacted, whether it's agriculture, whether it's disadvantaged communities, whether it's communities locally in the Delta that may be impacted from different ways, whether it's tribes, as we were discussing this morning. We want to ensure that we're hearing all those voices. So it is unfortunate that we didn't have as much participation today as the prior listening session. So I do want to signal that I'd be interested in another opportunity at an appropriate time if we could find a way to bring some other folks into the room at a different date. I don't know what that looks like, but I just want to offer that out there, Chair Esquivel, as perhaps a way to continue to ensure that as this process goes forward over the coming year, that there's other opportunities to hear directly from environmental justice folks. So just wanted to flag that and just thank everyone for being here today, taking the time.
Thank you, board member. I appreciate that. And over the next, again, we have an aggressive schedule here insofar as looking to have hearing by next summer. So this next year, there'll be a lot of activities happening as we run up to that discussion or that moment where their consideration is before the board. I would really like to get out into the community actually more. So I think that we'll have a lot of opportunity to make sure we're continuing to engage, structured and through an event like this and or otherwise. So let's continue to what we completely commit to, and what I hope everyone knows is we're always available. We're here to communicate with and to ultimately to listen, importantly, to your concerns. And the more that we can get out there more, and this is such an important project, I think maybe having something more out in the community. Let's think what that looks like, what the timing is. Again, there's a lot that's going to be happening in this next year. So I commit to continued engagement. Let's figure out what that right venue and time is. Okay, any other comments? And then otherwise, I just really, again, additionally appreciate everyone's time today and continued time and engagement on this project. There's no more greater urgency on this than there's a lot of urgency on projects at the board as well, but this is definitely at the top of the list. And so just thank you all for your time, your patience and commitment. And we're looking forward to what will be an additional discussion here soon. Let me see if there's anything within my script that I am missing or otherwise needing to say to you all. I don't see it. And so this will be posted on the Bay Delta update webpage. And additionally, that document with more detailed frequently asked questions and feedback from what we've been hearing will be posted and shared soon. So we'll engage with you all again here very soon. Reach out all the time, please. Email, phone, a pigeon, whatever it may be, here to make sure we're being responsive, and just really thankful for everyone's time this evening. We'll see you very soon. Be safe, be well. This concludes this listening session. See you all soon. Thank you.